Sarajevo, June 28th, 1914. The morning began like any other, bustling with energy, shaded by tension. The streets were alive with anticipation. Austria's heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, had come to tour the recently annexed province of Bosnia-Herzegovina. He wasn't just a visiting dignitary. He was a symbol of an empire trying to hold itself together in the face of revolution, rebellion, and nationalism. And not everyone was pleased to see him. As the Archduke's motorcade rolled down Apple Quay, past crowds and soldiers, what no one realized was that a team of 6 young assassins, some barely more than teenagers, were laying in wait armed with pistols and bombs. What happened was not just one of the most consequential killings in history, it was a moment soaked in conspiracy, chaos, and what some would later call fate. Because if just one turn had gone differently, if one driver hadn't made one wrong decision, if one grenade had hit its mark, maybe there would have been no world war. Maybe tens of millions wouldn't have died. Maybe history would have split along a different seam entirely. This is the Midnight Mystery Archive, and this is Kevin, and tonight we return to a fateful moment where the world caught fire. The early 20th century was a fragile dance of powers in Europe. Picture it. The British Empire stretched across the seas. Germany was rising fast. Russia was seething with internal unrest. And Austro-Hungary, old, sprawling, and decaying, was trying to keep its grip on the increasingly rebellious Balkan territories. Franz Ferdinand, the nephew of Emperor Franz Joseph, was next in line for the Austro-Hungarian throne. He was not a beloved figure in court circles, stubborn, opinionated, and often at odds with the ruling elite, but he was powerful, and his ideas for reforming the empire, particularly giving more autonomy to Slavic regions, were gaining traction, and that made him a threat. To Serbian nationalists, the annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908 was a slap in the face. It was land they considered part of a future Greater Serbia, and the Habsburgs had taken it. Serbian-backed revolutionary groups sprang into action, chief among them the secretive Crna Ruka, or Black Hand. The Black Hand's purpose was simple: resist Austro-Hungarian rule and reunify Slavic peoples by whatever means necessary. Their methods range from propaganda and sabotage to full-scale political assassinations. One of their leaders, Colonel Dragutin Dimitrovic, also known by his codename Apis, was a key Serbian intelligence officer with considerable influence. And when word came that Franz Ferdinand would be visiting Sarajevo, a city teeming with ethnic tension, it was seen as a golden opportunity. 6 young men were chosen, armed with bombs, pistols, and cyanide capsules to prevent capture. They were smuggled across the border and scattered along the motorcade route. Among them, 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip. Each assassin was instructed to strike at a specific moment as the motorcade passed. What followed was a cascade of failure and eerie coincidence. At 10:10 a.m., the first would-be assassin, Nedeljko Kabrinovic, threw his bomb at the Archduke's car. It bounced off the folded-down convertible roof and exploded under the next car, injuring members of the convoy. Franz Ferdinand miraculously was unharmed. Kabrinovic swallowed a cyanide capsule and jumped into the Majelka River to escape, but the poison only made him sick, and the river was only a few inches deep. He was captured immediately. You might expect the Archduke to abandon the tour at that point, but he didn't. Instead, the group adjusted the route, And here's where things get surreal. At 10:45 a.m., Franz Ferdinand and Sophie decided to visit the injured victims at the hospital, but no one informed the driver of the route change. He turned onto Franz Joseph Street, right past the corner where Gavrilo Princip, dejected from his earlier failed attempt, happened to be standing outside a cafe. When the driver realized the mistake, he stopped the car and began backing up, slowly, giving Princip a perfect shot. 2 shots. One hit Sophie in the abdomen, one struck the Archduke in the neck. He turned to his wife and said his last words, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." Both would die within minutes. That was the shot that started a war. But behind the horror, the grief, the headlines, there were unanswered questions. Why did security fail so catastrophically? Why was the Archduke sent into a city teeming with hatred on a symbolic date, Vidovdan, the Serbian national holiday? Why did no one change the plans after the first bomb attack? And most chilling of all, was this more than just a nationalist plot? Were shadowy elements inside governments, the Austrians, the Serbs, even possibly the Germans, complicit in allowing this powder keg to ignite? The story we know, the one written in textbooks and memorialized in documentaries, goes like this. A teenager driven by nationalist rage killed a royal figure and unintentionally triggered a world war. But in the shadows behind that story is something far murkier. A series of eerie coincidences, security lapses, and ignored warnings that suggest the assassination of Franz Ferdinand may have been far more than a random act of political violence. In fact, some believe it was allowed to happen. Let's start with the most basic question. Why was the Archduke even in Sarajevo that day? He wasn't a popular figure. His reformist leanings, especially his support for giving Slavs more autonomy, had alienated many hardliners in the Austro-Hungarian court. Some historians argue that his death actually benefited the war-hungry elites in Vienna, who saw Serbia as a threat and wanted an excuse to go to war. Documents from the era reveal warnings sent in advance of the visit. Serbian officials had intercepted intelligence that an assassination plot was forming and had attempted to warn Austrian authorities. Those warnings were ignored. The security arrangements for the Archduke were nothing more than laughable. No armored car, no clear or guarded route, no secure perimeter, and critically, no change of plans after the first bomb attack. Who makes that decision? Who lets the next in line to the throne continue a tour after an attempted bombing? It is beyond comprehension. Some point the finger at General Petoric, the military governor of Bosnia, who insisted the tour proceed. Others wonder whether Franz Ferdinand's own stubbornness and pride played a role. He refused to appear frightened or cancel the visit, fearing it would show weakness. But what if the incompetence wasn't incompetence at all? What if it was a cover? There's a theory that the Austro-Hungarian secret police knew the assassination was coming and let it happen. Not because they were powerless, but because they wanted it to happen. The death of the Archduke would give Vienna the political capital it needed to strike Serbia and rally support for war. Within hours of the assassination, they were already drafting an ultimatum. Some go even further. They claim Germany, Austria's close ally, encouraged the hardline approach. Evidence suggests Kaiser Wilhelm had previously told Austrian officials he would support them if it meant a larger conflict. It's chilling to consider. The murder of Franz Ferdinand wasn't just a flashpoint, it may have been a pretext. Let's look at the assassins. Most of the young men involved, including Princip, had ties to the Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist secret society. But the organization wasn't just a rogue operation, it was tied to the Serbian military. Colonel Apis, its leader, was head of Serbian military intelligence. So here's the twist: the Serbian government itself, did they authorize the assassination? That's a hotly debated question. Serbia's official stance was denial. The prime minister at the time, Nikola Pasic, did in fact try to warn the Austrians, but whether he was truly out of the loop or trying to avoid blowback for an operation he couldn't control isn't clear. After the assassination, Apis himself would later be tried and executed by his own government, ostensibly for plotting a coup. Some see that as conveniently silencing a man who knew too much. Franz Ferdinand may have been a target not because he was a warmonger, but because he wasn't. His views on ethnic autonomy posed a threat to the structure of the empire. He was seen as a moderating force, someone who might resist going to war with Serbia. Some believe his death was orchestrated, or allowed, by members of his own empire who wanted war and were afraid he'd block it. It's also been noted that the day of the assassination, Vidovdan, or St. Vitus Day, wasn't just a national holiday in Serbia. It commemorated the 1389 Battle of Kosovo, a symbol of Serbian resistance against the Ottoman Empire. It was the perfect symbolic day for a message of rebellion and a spark to ignite nationalist fervor. Was it a coincidence, or were the players choosing their timing with ritualistic precision? We'll never know the full extent of who knew what or who pulled which strings, but the assassination of Franz Ferdinand reads less like a tragedy and more like a chain of complicit silence, convenient outcomes, and shadowy hands nudging history toward war. It took just 2 gunshots. At 10:45 a.m., Gavrilo Princip stood in front of a delicatessen and pulled out an FN Model 1910 pistol. His target, the Archduke, was seated beside his wife Sophie. His first shot hit her in the abdomen, the second struck Franz Ferdinand in the neck. Both died minutes later. It could have ended there, a single tragic day, an isolated act of political violence. But instead, those 2 bullets tore the thread of peace that had tenuously held Europe together. Within 37 days, the world would be at war. Let's walk through how that unraveling occurred and why many believe it didn't have to. Austria-Hungary's leaders didn't act immediately. In fact, they waited nearly 3 weeks before responding. Why? Because they were preparing. Behind the scenes, Austria consulted its powerful ally Germany and received what is now infamously known as the blank check, a promise of unconditional support from Kaiser Wilhelm II. Armed with his guarantee, Austria delivered an ultimatum to Serbia. It was severe and intentionally so. Historians agree it was designed to be rejected. Serbia didn't reject parts of the ultimatum, and on July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war. Russia, who viewed itself as the protector of Slavic nations, and still does, mobilized in Serbia's defense. Germany in turn declared war on Russia and then France. When Germany invaded neutral Belgium, Britain entered the war. In a matter of weeks, what began in Sarajevo became a global conflict. Was this truly unavoidable? Many scholars today argue that World War I was not inevitable, that the war could have been stopped at multiple points during the July crisis. So why wasn't it? Was it arrogance, miscommunication, or something more deliberate? Some argue the war was actively desired by generals, arms manufacturers, and nationalist politicians who believed war was cleansing, patriotic, and even necessary. Germany, for example, was dealing with rising socialism, internal strife, and growing economic pressure. Austria feared losing control of its diverse empire. Russia was struggling with unrest. For some elites, war was a way to unite their people and suppress dissent. Could the death of Franz Ferdinand have not been a disaster, but a geopolitical opportunity? There's even a fringe theory that the war was triggered on purpose to redraw the map of Europe, pushed by financiers and secret societies seeking to disrupt old powers and control emerging ones. That theory may be dramatic, even conspiratorial, but it speaks to the deep suspicion many still feel about how quickly the war devolved into a worldwide conflict and how many benefited from it. And then there's the personal cost. Nearly 20 million people died in World War I. Families were destroyed, nations were shattered, and an entire generation of young men lost in muddy trenches and gas-choked battlefields. It's easy to focus on the politics, the documents, the chessboard of diplomacy. But it began with a man and a woman bleeding out in the back of a car in a city far from home, and it ended with the world on fire. Some called it fate, some called it stupidity, others still whisper it was by design. Today, if you walk the streets of Sarajevo, you'll find a small plaque on the Latin Bridge. It marks the spot where Gavrilo Princip fired the shots to change the world. But the echoes of those bullets didn't stop in 1914. They reverberate throughout every war, every failed peace, every political conspiracy that followed. And the deeper you look, the murkier the story becomes. After his arrest, Princip was interrogated by Austrian authorities who sought to prove Serbia's complicity. Under heavy questioning, he maintained that he acted independently, motivated by patriotism, not as a direct agent of the Serbian government. Yet the Black Hand, the secret society behind the plot, was intertwined with Serbian military leadership. One of its most prominent members, Colonel Dragutin Dimitrovic, also known as Apis, was the head of Serbian military intelligence. So was this a rogue operation, or did someone somewhere light the match on purpose? The Austrian court never proved direct state involvement, but they didn't need to. The war had already begun. Franz Ferdinand's death was especially tragic for one haunting reason. He wasn't the tyrant many feared. In fact, he was a reformer, one of the few voices in the Austro-Hungarian monarchy advocating for increased autonomy of Slavic people. Had he lived, some believe he might have prevented war, not started it. That irony, the man killed the liberated people who might have benefited from his survival, is one of history's cruelest twists. Over the decades, various documents from the period have disappeared or been classified. Diaries, intelligence reports, even details from Gavrilo Princip's final days, he died of TB in prison in 1918, are frustratingly incomplete. And then there's the claim, repeated in hushed circles, that a second team of assassins had been dispatched that day as backup. While no definitive evidence confirms it, testimonies from police and Secret Service agents at the time suggest there were more operatives in Sarajevo than officially acknowledged. A lone assassin? Or a coordinated conspiracy too vast to trace? Franz Ferdinand's assassination is more than a historical event, it's a template. A trigger point that reveals just how fragile global peace can be, and how, under the right conditions, all it takes is one act to throw the world into chaos. From Lee Harvey Oswald to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, echoes of Sarajevo repeat across the 20th and 21st centuries. In each we find a disaffected shooter, a web of secret affiliations, political powers eager to capitalize on the violence, and a truth that is never fully known. Was Gavrilo Princip a freedom fighter, a terrorist, or just a pawn? The Midnight Mystery Archive exists for stories like this, where facts fade into shadow and history leaves us with more questions than answers. We'll likely never know who, if anyone, truly orchestrated the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But one thing is clear. Those 2 shots on a quiet morning in Sarajevo didn't just end 2 lives. They reshaped the entire world. This is the Midnight Mystery Archive. This is Kevin. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Remember, new mysteries arrive every Tuesday and Thursday. And also remember this: sometimes the past doesn't stay buried.